and colleague of Fred's. I'd like to welcome you to this celebration of his life. I came to UTD 20 years ago to study with Fred, and after having read his book, The Culture of Hope, but I didn't realize then just how much of an impact he would have on my life and the lives of so many others. His passing is a loss I know we will all feel for years to come, a loss overshadowed only by the gratitude we feel for having known him and the delight and insight of the beautiful poetry and prose he has as eternal lines to time left behind for us. We thought it fitting, therefore, to commence the celebration of Fred's life with his poetry. And so for the next 20, 30 minutes, a handful of Fred's former students will read a selection of his poetry as family, friends, colleagues, collaborators, and admirers find their way here to remember and honor him. I'm going to read two poems from April Wind, Texas Rainbow. Solemn, unbent, an arc of rays, a rigid shaft of curvature, so perfect, yet so dim upon the air, has purified the haze, and given all its pointed light, its wink and tinctured shimmerings, to edge and sharpen out these earthly things in a sneeze of delight. Our life's a mother liquid, and its solute and its golden leaven falls from the fading sacrifice of heaven over the green bright land. The next poem I read is The Blessing. Sometimes sweet life presses too closely on the soul. Sometimes love's muscles ache with a familiar paralysis, and any effort makes us spasm and shake. The milky acids that control the mechanism of exhaustion burn for their purgation and forgetfulness. Like little poems that fatigue the spirit, folding it too often upon one turn. The small twistings of happiness bend us close to our break. I've taken artist vows that I'd not speak about the mere coincidences of my life. Reader, you're not a priest, I'll not confess what I'd not mention to my wife. The anecdote of personal existence should die, unless the sense's genius pranks in some freak of unrecordable loveliness that reaches outward to eternity. Or if philosophy, or if the flame of God consumes it utterly, or if the wise heads of my sons, conceived in those intelligent and graceful arms, take it and make it more than me, that might the moon's light blue in the southern wind, under an airy roof of clouds, I'd see, as eyes grew bright as mine, the names engraved upon the stones, the distant lamplight caught within a face of polished granite and the burying ground. Romantic place. I'd come there vaguely to escape the pain of mortal happiness. But in the village of the dead, farmers and loving wives, insurance men, I did not feel afraid. What could they do to me? And suddenly, my eyes lifted to the naked woods around. It was a carnival of family fires. The many homes of colleagues, neighbors, friends, hillsides of dining tables, telephone wires, lit porches, darkened garden plots and bowls of flowers. Here, where I stood outside it all, a ghost. Beyond the ends of the earth, I turned and loved it once again. That strange kitchen, the red counter with the lamp, the tall chairs, the lady with the book I knew as mine. I had no mortal cares. My body, calm as air, became a sign.
Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Diane Durant, and I'm a professor in the Bass School here at UTD. During my time as a graduate student at UTD, I was the editor of Sojourn, now Reunion, and studied poetry with Dr. Turner, who taught me a whole new way of reading the books of Genesis and Exodus from the Hebrew Scriptures and instilled in me a confidence to trust my poetic voice. Several years later, Dr. Turner would serve on my master's thesis committee, championing my free verse about growing up in small-town Texas. He was such a delight. I am blessed to have studied with him and honored to read some of his poetry for you today. I want to read two selections from his book, The Garden, which Dr. Turner published in 1985. The first one is titled Orchard Thieves. Orchard Thieves. We devour love as dirty urchins wolf a stolen peach. We are shameless, being too old to care about future comparisons. Our voices are hoarse. The small birds, too, at the end of these spring days that last 16 hours, find their shrill pipes rusty with whispers, pollen, rich dust. Our hands pick each other's pockets. Criminals, we await any opportunity to conspire. Our parched fingers ache. Our cheeks feel a perpetual dry glow. There's a catch in our throats, the alcoholic's quiver, the madman's singleness of thought. Do not worship nature, though. This fevers all of the mind. The great rose of the brain within its delicate shell, fed by the branched river of the central nervous system, is the flower that blushes into desire. Our lips, chapped with the kisses, are burnt by the breath of the spirit that passes, oxygen for the furnace, in its swift meditations between the outer and the inner worlds. At the world's meeting of three ways, the forest, the ravine, the arrow the young man shoots, the rush of the wind in the grass, aspiration of the disturbed nymphs, who, scared by the wounded heart, sway the trees, the arrow turning at once into a winged snake. The goddess sits tyrannical, death to who weakens. She has stolen time's sickle, fashioned it into the rind of a lover's moon. And the second one is The Rain It Raineth Every Day, for R.S., God's Spies. Fortune and managers will push and pull. This year, the wind blows one way, that another. If you were tragically stiff, you'd fall. If you got choked with patience, you'd not bother. On rainy days, sometimes it's best to dawdle over the coffee or under the splashy tree and let the fat drops fall down on your noddle and let the nagging moments duties be. Whatever happens, we're at home in the world. Nothing goes on without our knowing of it. Nothing does anything without being told. Alive or dead is the two ways we love it. So let's be brothers. Take up the task again. What's of the day can only be diurnal. Don't be disappointed. Farmers need rain. 5 miles up, the sun shines on eternal.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Foltz, and I studied with Professor Turner, as we like to say, back in the day. About 10 years ago, I met with him. I had a poem published in a journal, and we were talking about poetry. And I told him that I thought his poems were best when they expressed some kind of deeper feeling, kind of a change in emotion or feeling state. So I'm going to read just two poems that I think express this kind of window into that feeling state that he had. We all know that a lot of his poems are, cerebral, and they can be many times difficult to get through, but I think some of his best poems are the simple ones. This is a poem called Spring Evening from 1992. Above the baby powder clouds, the sky is china blue. Soon, young and chattering, the crowds of stars come pushing through. And this is the first dispensation, the setting up of the odds. This is the evening of creation. This is the time of the gods. He was a fan of Chinese poetry. Me too. Du Fu and Tao Yunming and all of them. They were great. This is another poem. I told him once that this was his best poem, and he smiled disagreeably. But I think I was right, and that he was wrong. But I do like this poem. It's Villanelle on the Oregon Coast from Margaret Prentice from 1999. Many a time I've dreamed of such a place where darkened headlands tumbled to the shore and a white ocean blew against my face. An inland valley gave a breathing space against the water's overwhelming roar. Many a time I've dreamed of such a place. Sorry. I think I'll drink. But the great wind of dream time would erase all human detail, leaving just a core that the white ocean blew against my face. Now, though, our footprints measure out our pace upon this homeland that I never saw. Many a time I've dreamed of such a place. The cypress pins and huckleberry lace had been invisible to me before when that white ocean blew against my face. Sister and stranger, you gave me the grace to read the print upon the wind-blind shore. Many a time I'll dream of such a place where that white ocean blows against my face.
My name is Jennifer Crumley. I am too short for where the mic is, but we're just going to leave it there. I am incredibly proud to have once been referred to my face as, oh, you're a Turner person. I'm going to be reading from Genesis, which, as some of you know, actually inspired me to write a song about that he then forcibly made me play for his graduate poetry class, which was incredibly embarrassing, but gained a lot of new friends for me, and I appreciated that. In November of 2010, Fred's longtime friend and colleague, J.T. Frazier, died. And I remember a few weeks after Frazier's passing, asking Fred how he was holding up. And he said, you know, when someone dies, it's a bit like they disappear, but over time, pieces of them start to come back to you. So it is my sincere wish that for all of us today, we leave here with a lot more Fred than we came in with. I'll be reading from the final stanzas of Genesis. I had believed I must be miserable in my ill health and clogged with enemies, discouraged by the state so very gently the hero juices never learn to flow. I have no testament to make of prison camps, gaunt intellectuals with fiery eyes, or deaths beneath the clubs of the police. So that resistance to this kindly pressure seems the ungratefulness of a spoiled child. But now I saw I always had been happy. I had my task, my manuscript. So what could they do to me that they had not done? Stealing the copies, making sure my friends did not get their promotions or their raises, letting me always know I was observed. What was dispiriting was being so near the end of all those labors, and the moment when I must think upon my death in this to me so foreign and so false a land. And all the time, the Sibyl seemed to say, as I transcribed but did not hear her words, I had been serving history. I was the worn stone in its stream that turns its course, that multiplied by many makes the mountain, that causes it to flow at all. Freedom and freedom's soul, the all-creating beauty, attended me and made my labors rich. If modest talents and a faulty ear so flawed the work that it would never stand beside the giants of the earth's wild past, yet this might be the best, because the only epic of protest in our darkening glide. And so the opportunity of hope never is absent while time yet endures. But what was I to do now? It was over. Polish, revise, of course. There have been those who've worn away a mighty oeuvre that way and should be quite content to start again. But that would surely be, considering the heroes of my tale, who never let revision daily in the way of action, a counter-imitative kind of fallacy, hypocrisy, before the gates of being. No, for the roses, their solstitial blood casting a haze of incense on the thickets, naked of all but a few rattling leaves, trailing their veil, fragrant, invisible across the hillsides, now reminded me of that bright cave, distant by so much space, by such an unimaginable cold, where a girl, Sybil, pretty in her curls, preached how the universe was yet so young, how all this was a prologue to the play. This manuscript will perish when I die, or when the earnest guardians of our good find it and give it to the cleansing flames. But there may be another poet, perhaps, no better gifted than myself, who will, by that communication poets know, speak it again in quite another form. Perhaps he has already, or she has. For why should not the conversation pass both ways across the anterooms of time? Because its sap has gone to feed a future, turned by the least new budding to a way I cannot dream. Is there a kind of music in the long story of these men and women whose ending may transfigure its beginning, bury the teller in the telling? Listen.
Good afternoon. My name is Mariam Beg. And the first time I spoke with Fred, it drove him into a passionate, rageful monologue about why I couldn't be Oedipus. He was asking for volunteers from his freshman class, and I was the only one. So I suggested I be Oedipus, and he went like, no! Why do you want to be Oedipus? I want to be king. Why don't you be Jocasta? She doesn't have enough lines. Fine, be Oedipus. So I was the worst Oedipus you could ever hear in the history of all Oedipuses ever read aloud. After then, anytime he would see me on campus, he would ask if I was enjoying a life in the theater. So I would say, yes, I am in the Bacchae. And he would say, let me guess, you are Dionysus. Or I would tell him, I'm in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And he would say, congratulations on being Oberon. So I would say, hey, Fred, only in your class could I be king. So get to directing. Choosing a poem today was easy. About 21 years ago, actually to this day, I walked into a church to be part of a performance of Prayers of Dallas when he asked me to read a poem at the last minute about a woman that he believed to be a saint. Prayers of Dallas was a collection of 50 poems that were inspired by his loved ones, his families, his colleagues, his students, even his pets. A love letter to the city of Dallas. It was quite a hashtag, if you know, you know, kind of a moment. I would pour through this script and ask myself, which poem is about Dean Dennis Kratz? Or if Dr. Gutmann, is that Juji Aswad? Or Buster the dog must be Professor Kurchak. No. He was not Buster the dog, he only played Buster the dog, a trend he continued later, if you know, you know, at Dallas Institute of Humanities, where they presented Juji and Fred's cut of Faust. So my poem that he wanted me to read was called Maria Consuela Hilote. It was so beautiful that I ugly cried through it, botching the entire performance, after which he came to me and he hugged me and I said, how was it? He said it was better than my reading of Oedipus. So obviously, today, I am not going to read Maria, because that would be like reading Jocasta. And this is Fred's class, and in Fred's class, I get to be king. To be the king, to do this properly, I will read a poem he performed right before I did that night. A poem I believe he wrote about himself. The title kind of gives it away, so if you know, you know. This is from Prayers of Dallas, Prof. Roderick Wheeler. Really, Fred? So, it has come. I, who have explained death to 1,000 students, now have death explained to me. How odd to see my angry poet friend Kate, or Morphia as she would rather be, more gentle, trusting of a white man than she would ever allow until this day, weeping, unwomaned of herself, tear-stained, not only for her mother, but for me, and how entirely useless anything I could say. And Father Kelly now, who has come to see his old professor dying, would not, despite his caller, speak of it. So we spend an hour in kindest lying, speaking of English lit, because he thought I don't believe, and I still played the deathbed hypocrite. But last night, after Dr. Gutmann had to leave, and I lay in a dazed and perfect agony, the drugs no longer working on the pain, and lonely, missing my dead Eudora, half insane. The little maid, Maria, came to me, hearing me groaning, set her mop aside, thick with dreadful fluids of the decay, wary lest she be punished for this liberty, but seeing me thus undignified, smoothed back my hair and rocked me like a child. Gentle Mary, meek and mild, held my body in her arms, deposition from a cross, words in Spanish from the Psalms. Let me feel the grief of loss, taught me to finally see. Let me weep at last for me. Weeping led to sleep, and dawn came on, with no renewal of the pain. And now, bound to my tree of chemistry, I stand before this window in the sky. I watch the sun come up again, and I am free. How many more sunrises, so beautiful, will I still see? The city pure and crisp and cool, each building lit on one side with a shadow, the whole world given generously to me, more lovely than a forest or a meadow. The streets, the bridges with their swarms of cars, humanity at work, its daily miracle, on loan from the great stars, one of which stands godlike into the sky, and it all goes on if I or any other one of it should die. The site is absolutely free. The building of the great wealth of the world, the death-denying drive of history, and I am woven like a tiny thread of gold into the vast fabric spread out in dawn. My students teach its young. My thoughts will mold some fraction of it when I am gone, as it has molded mine. May it be morning when I die. Thank you.
Next, but I'm going to take this opportunity. I had a real hard time grieving, but I wrote a poem to help me get over it. This is Frederick Turner of Uganda, Oxford, Los Angeles, Colorado, Montana, Maine, and Dallas, and the many places he visited in the world. What we of sylvan glade thus encontre, of flutes magic and whistles temper tin. Fairies dance then in the cold mind of shaken spears. Odysseus, Beowulf, Parsifal, all the heroes of old, drunk in the wisdom of wording's way, philosophy and discourse, relevant though of ancient sway. Sagacious, one of angel kin or child, could be genius made, shaped in the forge bright, shining light that many knew. Hia, he would cry with one strike, and level Miltonic fights. Rose Myrta, you protectress, oversee students all his. With your caduceus small, Catholic, Protestant, children all. O you who know the balance between Mercury and life, the rod of Moses, the reality of judge and king, was his sternness without waver. Witness now, all you shadows, a force of man entering your company, high above Elysium and Valhalla. Here doth poets and warriors and philosophers reside, the culture of hope, the freedom of life. Go west, my son. The sun doth shine after every night. No gloom lasting has not its time. Yield not my memory. Greater man have I not known. Poetry is revived when voiced boldly. Like Virgil says, comedy divine, the marriage across heaven's river, remember. Alighieri bless his family on each and every shore to show their worth in word and deed. Diamonds of logic, betray us not, we citizens who have his brass temper learnt. Even to Hamlet's we thus retire. To be or not to be is not the question we should ask, but to live heroically, as did he, brave among so many brash rebels. Quietus, solemn, peace, the mind at last gets deserved sleep.
Good afternoon. It's a little scary. We're on time. I'm not quite sure how long that will last, but thank you all for being here and helping us to celebrate Fred. I'm just going to start with the first lines of his poem. To all my friends, that day we shall have time to ramble all day long. It won't be all day long, but we have quite a bit of rambling to do and celebrating to do. Before I go into my speech, I just want to share a couple of memories that kind of connect me with Fred. One of them, he was on my hiring committee, so you may think there's good news or bad news. I'll leave that one to you, but it was quite an encounter right from the beginning. I think thereafter, the next one that I have always, my mind, graduation, it's just almost upon us. He always made that very special in many ways, but partly also by his Oxford regalia with that furry thing hanging over there. I thought, okay, we're ready to go. Only Fred would have had something like that. And then the next of my many memories are these endless amounts of conversations where Fred would go at random at things and would always say in between, and he would always think, yeah, I hope so that I know, but I so much want to, and he was on to the next one. And so the thing that empowered, I think, all of us, and particularly students, was that sense that there was no limit to him. And therefore, he also never imposed any limits upon everyone else. And so I think that was probably one of the greatest gifts he was able to give to any one of us. And then I see Fred there. That was quite a history-making, right? The Faust production. Fred as a Mephistopheles, and then Fred Kirchhoff together. So those are just a couple of my memories, and then obviously a good many of them also tied to his particular friendship to Juji and the Ackerman Center and the many kind of works that we did together. We've always called upon him also when we needed that proper British pronunciation, and he was always ready to do that. So therefore, good afternoon, friends, colleagues, and members of the Bass School and the UT Dallas family. I'm really thrilled that you all came to celebrate together with us an extraordinary individual. Fred's passing has left a big void amongst all of us, but all of our collecting memories and poems and songs will hopefully help to fill this somehow. So I'm thrilled that today we can be united here and pause a little bit to celebrate an extraordinary man who poured really so much of himself into each one of us. And we thought that this was also a perfect day because it's his anniversary of his birthday today, November 19th. So Fred had taught at UT Dallas for 35 years before retiring at 2020 as a professor of literature. It's one of my other memories when he came and he said, you know, I want to retire. I said, no, we're not doing this. But then he said, no, I really want to finally have time to work. And I was like, okay, this one I will not be able to stop with all persuasion. He was intent on really going for it and really felt like he wanted to deliver all of his time now to his primary objective, and that, I think, was writing. He was obviously an award-winning giant in the world of the arts and humanities, a poet, a literature scholar, individual interested in artificial intelligence, into psychology, art history, chaos theory, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's almost encyclopedic. Like I said, there truly was no limit to his curiosity. He was nominated for various Nobel Prizes and also a recipient of highest literary honor from Hungary for the translation that he did together with Zsuzsi, the Livingston Poetry Prize Award, the Penn Dallas Chapter Golden Pen Award, and others. And if you talk to any one of our generations of the comments that he taught, you hear that amongst Fred's greatest contribution was his impact as an educator, and I tried to get at this really. And that's why you're all here, and I'm not standing by myself here, because he had such a profound impact on so many of you. Fred really unleashed his own force upon students, transforming them into becoming themselves. And I think that's the greatest gift any one of us can do as a teacher, is really to enable the individuals to become their best version of themselves. And Fred was a magician in the art of that, I would think. Though he had a funny biography in terms of things that really made him. He was the son of an anthropologist, a keen observer, in other words. Fred was born in England during World War II, so not particularly time destined for future greatness, but really at the peril of humanities of sorts. He lived in all kinds of places, amongst them Africa, where he was educated actually by a different form of distant learning, not our online learning, but by envelopes that arrived and posed questions that he then had to fill out and answer and return. He was also a big lover of the countryside that forever would inspire him, I think, on the basis of these experiences. Fred was educated at Oxford University, taught in England prior to his academic position at UC Santa Barbara and at Kenyon College. He became a US citizen in 1977 and arrived at UT Dallas in 1985. So he's been around with us for a long, long time. Again, for us nowadays, it's a little hard to remember because we are so enchanted with the many new buildings and the growth and all that, but there must have been something quite magnetic about that UT Dallas of the 1980s. Maybe this idea of the Wild West. Dennis was around there as well already, of really unlimited opportunities that, in particular for a mind of his, would have been appealing, this kind of unrestricted idea of collaboration and interdisciplinarity. So perhaps there would have been endless number of conversations that would have occurred, started out maybe with poetry, and then before you knew it, if you didn't pay attention, boom, you were in AI or something else, and you were like just trying to hang on with dear life as he was charting his territory. But he always knew where he was heading, or if he didn't, he enjoyed actually that uncertainty just as much. So he showed us that ideas matter, and that showed us what it means really to be a curious mind, and I think a relentless one at that. So Fred's ideas and influence will live on amongst us in the many students that have come together to share in the quote-unquote rambling of the day, and who together have really very quickly after the news broke formed like a, what was it, WhatsApp network or something like that, where they all got together and somehow got me hooked in this as well. So I love any form of social media. No, I don't. But this was one too good to turn down. So thank you for all that you've done together to make this happen, because it was a really multi-layer process of getting this all together, and we needed a lot of volunteers to help us make it happen. So thank you for your brilliance and your generous spirit, Fred. Your light will always shine. Thank you.
Finally enter the temple of Isis and Osiris, the temple of knowledge. They focus on two phrases over and over again. His spirit is bold and his heart is pure.
I'm Dana Joya. I knew Fred Turner for almost 40 years. And what I'm going to say about him is what I think everyone will say about him. He was one of the best men I have met in my life. He was deeply good and phenomenally intelligent. I have never met someone with a mind as capacious and flexible as Fred Turner had. I never was in his company when I didn't leave it more intelligent than I came. I'll miss him terribly.
First mistake of the day. Whoops, thank you. Not easy being short. Twin berries on one stem was the metaphor that the physician William Osler used to describe the proper relationship of the sciences and humanities. His favorite example was the Roman poet Lucretius, who wrote a profound and enthralling epic poem entitled De Rerum Natura, translated as On the Nature of Things, or more audaciously, On the Nature of Reality. That poem perfectly blended the sciences, philosophy, and poetry. In my mind, Fred is a modern Lucretius, and then some. He was an imaginatively audacious and intellectually profound thinker who revitalized and transformed epic poetry, for one thing. And that was only part of his larger devotion to the union of science, the humanities, and the arts. He also led a renewal of formalism in contemporary poetry. A mutual friend, the poet who writes as A.M. Juster, said that Fred never received the credit he deserved for his beneficent impact on the next generation of poets. That lack is partly related to the fact that Fred bore his learning so lightly. It's easy to underestimate the breadth and depth of his conceptual interests, from Shakespeare's economics to transforming, terraforming Mars, to translating Holocaust poetry, to exploring the nature of beauty and hope. I've been thinking about our conversations. I can't recall Fred ever complaining about anything or belittling anybody. There simply were too many other things to think about and talk about. Poetry, beauty, love, tomorrow. I'd like to conclude with comments drawn from two poet translators whom, like Fred, I deeply admire. First, an observation by Juster. The literary world would be much better off if we had more poets, not only as gifted, but as kind as Fred Turner. And I would add, so would the academic world and the world in general. And finally, from Lucretius, appropriately quoted in translation, his lines about the philosopher Epicurus, whom his De Rerum Natura is dedicated to, that I think describe Fred as well as anyone ever could. And so his lively intellect prevailed, and forth he marched, advancing onwards far beyond the flaming ramparts of the world, and voyaged in his mind throughout infinity. Thanks, Fred, for being, for teaching, for being an ideal colleague, for being a model, and especially for the reports of your travels, often in prose, sometimes in poetry, and if in poetry, usually rhyming. Thank you for those fruits and berries of your labor that you kindly left behind for all of us to read.
A lot will no doubt be said here today about Fred's commitment to interdisciplinarity. And indeed, anyone who ever met Fred or was taught by Fred or was a colleague of Fred's would have been more or less immediately struck by the sheer range of disciplines and questions his mind so freely, and we could add just blissfully and joyfully engaged. This is so much the case that to say that Fred was a poet might seem woefully inadequate and might seem to miss the mark of accounting for the totality of someone who was at all times a poet, but who we might say was also so much more than that. One of the first things I did when I joined the literature faculty as an assistant professor 18 years ago was to read Fred's brilliant and supremely exciting book, Shakespeare's 21st Century Economics, The Morality of Love and Money, published by Oxford University Press in 1999. The questions the book asks and answers are at first sight not at all questions about poetry or even literature. Instead, they're nothing less than what the book understands as the core questions of economics. What is value and how is it created? But the problem, Fred rightly understood, was that these questions, as he put it, are, quote, not accessible to the mathematical methods of the academic discipline of economics, which deals admirably with how utility, the technical term for value, is exchanged, stored, communicated, regulated, engaged, but which remains prudently silent on the nature and origin of utility itself. The answer, and I think this is what makes this book so brilliant and so important, the answer to these economic questions, Fred insisted, were to be found not in the quantitative models and methods produced by economics, but rather in the words produced by poets. And here again, Fred's words. Perhaps poets can tell us more than economists about what value is in itself, because after all, poets spend their lives making value out of combinations of words that have no economic worth in themselves, being common property, infinitely reproducible, and devoid of any rarity value. The argument of Fred's book, of course, was nothing less than that the poet Shakespeare is the key to both understanding 21st century economics and to solving its social challenges. And what's really thrilling about this book in a lasting way, one could say, is that at a time when the discipline is trying to make sense of how to privilege the literary object as a distinctive, unique thing in the world, and at the same time to engage with a broader set of social and human questions, Fred's book really foresaw the answer to that problem and that impasse. And what makes the book so meaningful to me is the transcendent primacy that's given to literature in that book, not in spite of its aesthetic ambitions, but actually because of them. And there's a lot more I could say about what it meant to have Fred as a colleague here for almost 2 decades and everything that he meant to several generations of students. I do want to say that Fred's legacy intellectually lives on in our program, where this commitment to the primacy of the literary very much lives on. So on behalf of my colleagues, thank you, Fred, for giving us that legacy, and thank you for everything you did to make the world a better place for people to think deeply about literature. Thank you, Fred.
My name is Wade Newman. Fred Turner was my professor, an expansive poet colleague, and friend. I've known him since 1974, when I started my freshman year at Kenyon College. Little did I know then that he would become one of the most brilliant minds of the past 50 years. His passing marks the last of the original expansive poetry movement triumvirate, along with Fred Firestein and Dick Allen. I'll begin with an anecdote. February 9th, 2015 was the last time I saw Fred in person. My wife had joined me on a business trip to Dallas, and the three of us met at Palomino, a restaurant that has since closed. That morning, I had emailed Fred to ask if he had an extra copy of his new book of Albanian folk poetry, slung across the shoulder, translated by Fred and Zhiki Marinaj. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, comprised of many bawdy pieces. Fred responded that he would bring the book and read us a salacious excerpt. Toward the end of our meal, true to his word, Fred began to read aloud a selection from the book in his distinctive, eloquent English voice. When he finished reciting one poem, he flipped the pages to find another, even bawdier, and then another and another to entertain us. Over the decades when I had witnessed Fred give readings in public, he seemed to be transported into an almost shamanistic state, and that evening, with each new poem, Fred's delivery grew louder and louder, and his dive into poetic rapture deeper and deeper. Mind you, this was the first time my wife had met him. Our table was located in the center of the restaurant, and I glanced around, observing other patrons and staff stop their conversations and tasks out of pure wonder. I doubt if any could have recognized the special moment that had just occurred. That moment has still lasted for me. Fred wrote beautiful poetry. We can honor him by reading and rereading the books he wrote. In one poem, he said, "Beauty is the only final consolation." In his natural aphorisms, he wrote, "Gardens remind us that the purpose of art is joy, and that poetry is the folding of the interface between us and the world." In a poem titled Here, Now, he wrote, "The tax deductions of eternal loss, the muddy meltings of a third-rate star, a liquid intricacy squeezed from chaos. O mortal body, this is what you are." In another poem called Glass, he wrote, "I learned that glass can be compared to the soul. Glass is the slowest liquid and will pool and swell across its lowermost diameter, yet more elastic than is rubber or fine steel, and yet again brittle and liable to flaw. Yet glass deceives the eye by seeming absent when it stands obstructing other energies than light, as common matters do. Artist of light, of glass, please do not graze me even lightly, lest I break. Yet you have shown me that I flow." Fred composed a poem called Freeze Tag, in which he plays a game of tag with a group of children on a short winter's day. And even though the evening's getting colder, and soon we'll have to be going inside, and they'll be very different when they're older, and even though we're all a little tired, and even if there never is a spring, and even if the stars will all go cold, the rules of the game permit no ending, and it can be 1,000 years old. Assuming Fred's spirit is here today, perhaps he would say, "Tag, now you're all it."
A couple of weeks ago, can you hear me? Did you say no? A couple of weeks ago, I fell asleep pondering what to say about Fred in under 3 minutes after over 40 years of friendship. I dreamt that I was at this celebration of Fred's life. There were a lot of people, and there he was, in the flesh. I said, "Fred, here you are, at your own memorial." He smiled and said, "I wouldn't miss it." I told him that I loved him, and we hugged, and I said, "You will always be alive here in my heart." Perhaps that's what we all feel about Fred. He's vibrantly alive. Perhaps that's what we all feel about Fred. He's vibrantly alive in his sublime books and poems, and surely he will always be alive in our hearts. Fred is the very soul of love. It was always a joy to hear how he spoke so lovingly of Mei Lin, of their sons, Daniel and Ben, of his entire family, his students, colleagues, and friends. Fred and Mei Lin were married for just shy of 60 years. I once asked him if he had ever thought about other women, and he said, Mei Lin is all women. Last week I told her that, and she said, Fred tends to idealize me, particularly in his poetry. Of course, we know that Fred was not just a lover, he was wickedly funny, and he was a hell of a fighter. I once asked him where he might want to retire, and he said, any place, as long as there's a karate dojo where I can go kick the shit out of people. Over the decades, we disagreed and sparred over many things, particularly politics. But recently, we saw eye to eye, Fred to Fred, about how appalled we were by the current state of our government. Fred was fighting mad. He passionately loved this, his adopted city and country. But I know him as a citizen not of Dallas or the United States, but as a red-blooded, patriotic citizen of infinity. As much as he lived a fully embodied, down-to-earth, day-to-day existence, Fred's vision was cosmic, timeless, non-dualistic, scientifically sound, and spiritually luminous, numinous. He was aware of his inmost nature as one and the same as all and everything existing everywhere, always. An honest-to-goodness, selfless self that was never born and will never die. I'm so grateful for having Fred in my life. I love you, my dear friend. You will always be alive here in my heart. And to quote the old folk song, I dreamt I saw Fred Turner last night, alive as you and me. Fred, I said, you're 2 months dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he.
Hello, I'm here representing all of Fred's former students, which is a huge responsibility, and hopefully I can live up to that. The first time I met Fred Turner, it was probably 2003. I had signed up for an undergraduate lit course, and in waltzes Fred without saying a word. He walked directly up to the lectern, stopped, took a deep breath, and immediately starts reciting Shakespeare and Milton from memory. And the very air in the room shifted. Within minutes, he had reduced half the class, myself included, to tears with his passionate, from-the-heart reading. So it seems appropriate somehow that our final goodbye to this incredible titan of a poet and mentor to us all measures out the tears of his former students in the wake of his silent and sudden exit from this realm and into the next. His voice still lingers in the air for many of us. His wit and wisdom are always there during even the darkest of times to light a path forward. Fred Turner has served as our compass, as our cartographer, as our mentor, as our advisor, and our guide. He inspired us, he encouraged us, and gave us hope, and always found beauty where others did not. As a lover of stories and the power of narrative, I think Fred Turner would appreciate how his life and the providence of all of our paths crossing his influenced generations of students around the globe. Each of us has our own stories of Fred that we will never forget. One memory that stands out in my mind is that after a dinner trip with Fred, myself and my husband made to the cancer center that my husband worked at. Fred had asked to go to the cancer center after dinner. He wanted to see the machines. He wanted to see the technology. He wanted to talk radiation physics with my physicist husband, and they did. I have a very vivid memory of Fred with his arms up, his palms facing outward as the linear accelerator spun around, and he marveled with wonder in his eyes, looking upward the way the eyes of saints are painted, stargazing at the heavens. He went home and wrote a poem about that night. Amanda Ballard is a former student of Fred's and has countless memories of sharing meals and poems with Fred and their meeting of the minds inspired interdisciplinary scholarship that married neuroscience and the humanities. Andy Amato was guided and inspired by Fred both as a professor and a mentor for his scholarship on Heidegger and Shakespeare. Ricardo Gonzalez, a black belt in karate, also Fred Turner was as well. Their work combined movement and flow of bodies and words, abbreviating the intertwining of language and movement, the sacred and the profane. Abdul Malik Rezeski created a class featuring Fred Turner's philosophy and poetry that continues to inspire across disciplines. As students of Fred Turner, many of us will spend our lives living up to the gifts that Fred kindly and generously shared with each of us. His patience, his critique, his feedback, his encouragement, his always welcoming smile. May his legacy continue to shine brightly, and may we live our lives in such a way that Fred would appreciate the butterfly effect. His life will echo out across time, across disciplines, across languages, perhaps one day even galaxies. Fred embodied the very nexus of poetry, philosophy, humanity, art, education, and science. He will always be a true Renaissance man, and his legacy will live on in each and every one of us. Thank you, and thank you, Fred.
Hello from the UK. I am David Lum, a friend of Fred's from long ago. I speak on behalf of 7 of us. It's a pleasure and a privilege to say a few words about Fred. Fred read English at the University of Oxford. That's where we first met, and somehow we've been able to stay in touch over the years, some 62 years. A group of us studying on the same course began a friendship which has lasted. Back then in Oxford we formed a writers' group, and many of the 7 of us still meet. In London, once a year, we share our writing and still take pleasure in each other's company. Fred flew over from Texas several times to London to retain this friendship. Now the bond is broken. It's my privilege to say on behalf of our writers' group how much we miss him. May Lynn, his support and mentor over all these years, will miss him even more. Fred used to say his most precious possession was the rhyming dictionary that May Lynn bought him back then. Our thoughts are with her across 6,000 miles. It goes without saying that Fred surpassed us all in the quality of his poetry. While we struggled with our chosen literary forms, the poetry poured out of him. He was a professor before he was 30 and gained a fame both in America and in Britain. Fred was one of the very few of our number whose work will have made a memorable contribution to English literature. When the rest of our writers' circle meet in London next month, we will remember his work and we will celebrate his life.
If you could hear my heart right now, it's beating in iambic pentameter. I first met Fred on the page. Before I knew him, I knew his work. I studied it, loved it, carry lines of it with me. Then, in the mystery of good fortune, the name became a person, and the person became my teacher. He was my professor, one of the central voices in my graduate education. In his classroom, literature was a living conversation. He listened as intently as he spoke. He made rigor feel like an act of care. From the classroom, we moved to the workroom. Together we translated poems and built a few books, on deadline, in dialogue, often in laughter. He loved that moment where translation stopped being correct and began to sound true. In time, the professional bond extended into a friendship that filled my home and my life. Fred became a family friend, and to me and my wife, Dusita, like a father. He showed me how to be a better poet, a writer, a professor who serves for students, and above all, a human being who shows up. He also spoke often of his family. When I asked, what can I do for him? He would smile and say, Malin is taking great care of me, Jack. It was gratitude and testament of a marriage that strengthened him and gathered us all. To Malin, thank you for the grace you shared. Your care is part of his legacy. So today, I honor Fred in the only way I know, by promising to live up to the trust he placed in me. I'll tend the work he loved, the press, the translations, the students. I'll try to be the colleague, the poet, and the friend he believed I could become. His absence is real. So is his presence. In the work he began, in the lives he shaped, in the love he shared with Malin. Thank you, Fred, for making a student a collaborator a colleague, and a colleague a friend. Thank you for treating me as an equal and guiding me as a father. May we honor you not only in words, but in the work and kindness we do from here. Thank you.
My name is John Perryman, and it was my great good fortune to take Fred's graduate poetry seminar in January of 1992. He team-taught much of the class with close friend Zsuzsi Ajvath. They were in the midst of finishing their translation of Miklos Radnoti's poems, and both were at the height of their creative powers. It was an electric experience, a master class in poetry, translation, and collaboration. We students witnessed a fascinating process as Fred and Zsuzsi walked us through their approach to translation, finishing each other's sentences, insisting on meter, stopping to dwell on particularly challenging passages and the solutions they had negotiated. In this class and several others I took with Fred, I learned that the work of the poet, the scholar, and the teacher could be joyful work. In retrospect, I feel as if I'd stumbled unexpectedly into a workshop of one of history's great collaborations. I'd somehow find myself in the lab with Watson and Crick, or Hearthside with Tolkien and Lewis. Fred's breadth of learning, his generous spirit, his cheerful laughter, and his interest in the work and lives of his students were remarkable. Of all his gifts, though, none was more impressive than his fundamental moral decency. and the ease with which he entered into fellowship with people of all backgrounds. In Fred, the artist, scholar, and teacher were comfortably integrated. Each role fed the others. As a teacher, his mastery of content was matched only by his exacting and supportive criticism. He wanted his students to grow and learn. And that spring, his students learned that while translating Red Noti, Fred seemed to have worked out an understanding of translation as a sort of poet's journey to the underworld, similar to that of the epic hero. Fred believed poetry and the humanities more broadly were essential to the health of a culture. The poet's role was indispensable, for it was the poet, and the epic poet in particular, who distilled and ordered the knowledge and customs of a people, telling them, in a sense, their own story. The task often involved a journey into the past, to the land of one's ancestors, to return with wisdom with which to revitalize the community. This role required an expansion. Fred realized such a poetic in his works about terraforming Mars, about the graciousness of UTD's arts and humanities staff, about his son's great love for baseball, and about the Northern Lights with May Lin. And it's this final heroic role of the poet that I imagine Fred to be fulfilling even now. He is not gone, but only gone ahead of us. There in the distance, the shadowy verge where what's known meets what's unknown, blazing a tree that we might follow. I listen for his voice and recall how he'd muse on endings and beginnings, and am reminded of words like those concluding his beautiful syncretic poem, Field Notes. My father calls me in his web of stars, out of this earth, this life, as from the womb, and it is all still misty, incomplete. The Pentecostal bird glides on the lake. The play has just begun. The universe sways on its baby feet, stretches and yawns itself awake. The play has just begun. The universe awaits the coming of the Paraclete.
Hi, I'm Paul Fishwick, and I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Frederick Turner, or Fred, as he liked to be called. I knew Fred when he was working at the University of Texas in Dallas, and I was also. This is about 2020 to 2022. And when I was at the university, I spent most of my time on the bridge between arts and technology and computer science. So linking the two together. I spent the last 8 months working with him remotely since I now live in Florida, running a consulting company. My remote work with him was done in collaboration with Roger Molina's Art Sci Laboratory. Fred was always eager to cross bridges in disciplines, and very much a polymath, I think. Kind of an expert, very knowledgeable in many different areas. So Fred was an unusual poet, whereas many poets would dismiss some of the recent technologies, such as artificial intelligence, AI. Fred delighted in it. He was a real pioneer and explorer of possibility. The first poems produced by a package called FTH that we created were insipid, according to Fred. So over time, FTH was improved, and he started to converse more frequently with it, and it became kind of a natural part of his world, I think. His more recent comments can be summarized by an evolving artificial poet, this is speaking of FTH, that has significant moments and serious potential. So FTH, I want to just say more about it. This is, for FTH is shorthand for Fred the Heretic. It is on the GPT store run by OpenAI, and you can download it, just search for FTH. It's an AI generated, an AI-based poetry generator. So spend some time on a detailed prompt. If you wish to converse with Fred through this artificial means, and then once a poem is generated, spend a little bit more time conversing with FTH on questions and improvements that it can make to your poem. So think of your poem as sort of an evolving art form. So since FTH, we've researched other software and built it and produced several web apps. Web app is just a term used to describe software that runs in the web, like in a browser. These include a dueling poetry app where two poets speak in poems to each other. Another app produces a detailed analysis of a poem you give it. And a third app creates a poem and then links the content of that poem to the collection of the Met Museum in New York City. So I'm really grateful to have had the pleasure to know Fred. I think his interactions have greatly improved each of us that knew him. We certainly know a lot more about poetry. I even started a class at a local venue where I'm learning from classical poets. Just took the second class today. So we'll miss you, Fred, and hope and know really that you are still composing.
Fred Turner leaves an incredible legacy of creative production. His interests encompassed all aspects of human endeavor, certainly rooted in literature, but extending with strong branches into science as well. We are grateful for his guidance in our efforts to move into the transcendental field of emergent studies, an effort that captured his remarkable interests and energy. In the late 2010s, Bob Stern, a UTD professor of geosciences, became interested in understanding how the remarkable Earth systems came to be, and this led to wanting to learn about the philosophy and phenomenon of emergence. Emergence described the tendency of any high-energy, far from equilibrium system to spontaneously create new phenomena that cannot be predicted. Emergence is useful for thinking of just about anything, including natural systems like galaxies, hurricanes, and biological evolution, as well as human systems like art, war, and universities. It is a very useful way to understand times of rapid change like those of today. In the 2021 Athenaeum Review article, Damn Lies and Statistics, Bob noticed that Fred used the term emergence 15 times and reached out to discuss their shared interest. Roger Molina soon joined, and weekly meetings, which sometimes included lunches with Dean Romer, ensued. Our weekly meetings slowly attracted new people, most importantly, Tina Chin, and many students. The team published papers on emergence-related themes. Eventually, we established an informal research group, which we called the Off Center for Emergent Studies, and built a webpage for it. Last summer, we worked together to prepare a proposal to establish a formal UTD Center for Emergent Studies. We submitted this proposal at the end of summer and have high hopes that the UTD administration will approve it. None of this would have happened without Fred. Our philosophy reflects his, as captured by something he wrote 30 years ago. Art must be reunited with science. As the natural ally, interpreter, and guide of the sciences, art extends the creative evolution of nature on this planet and in the universe. The experience of truth is beautiful. Thus, the artist's experience and the scientists are at bottom profoundly akin. We can think of no better way to honor his memory than to continue our wide-ranging efforts to understand emergence across all parts of the universe and our university. Thank you.
We need a little invocation. So let us call the brilliance of the light of the sun, of Phoebus, of the shining one, of reason and illumination and inspiration into this room. My name is Simi Ali. I bring greetings from the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. The sentences, the invocation I just read, were the first words I ever heard Fred Turner speak. The occasion was a gathering of the Dallas Institute's fellows who were considering the 12 Olympian gods, the gods of the ancient pantheon. Fred was one of the first named Institute fellows. They were themselves an Olympian group, gathered by an Olympian who is in our midst, Dr. Gail Thomas, the Institute's founder. Mary Vernon is here, Barnaby Fitzgerald is here, and perhaps there are some other fellows in the room. When establishing the Dallas Institute, Gail called on Fred. She also called on Mortimer Adler and Jacques Barzun and others. All accepted her invitation to join a group of intellectuals and artists and visionaries whose concern was larger than any tiny niche particular to their own academic discipline. Gail was summoning the most powerful forces she knew to help her in a project whose immodest goal was and remains the redemption of our culture. Fred was a necessary ally. When, for the purposes of this occasion, I turned back to Fred's remarkable meditation on the god Apollo, delivered orally in 1995, apparently without notes, I could see Fred himself in the portrait he painted of the god, and also the seeds of the redemption in which he and we so profoundly believed. I just want to share a few words of this invocation of the god with you. Apollo is a beautiful god, but in a way, a very difficult god for us right now. Our culture has questioned, and in some ways rightly, everything that Apollo stands for. The splendor of his strong, young maleness, the way that in the Kouros sculptures he carries his shoulders as if they weigh nothing. It seems too confident for our skeptical age. There seems to be a tremendous lightness and strength and certainty about Apollo, but our culture finds him boring, finds that problematic, and for good reason. His brilliance, his clarity, his association with the sun, his capacity for order, and for a certain domination, the classical forms of the arts with which he's associated, the lyre, the strict order of the lyre, his urbanity, his excellence, all these give us pause. He's not, interestingly, crippled or doubting or cynical or weak. He's absolutely strong. He's identified with reason, the power of reason, with the pain, the hymn of victory. We find ourselves dazzled by his light. And honestly, couldn't we say the same of Fred Turner?
Hello, I'm Kim Stanley Robinson, and it is my pleasure and an honor to join this celebration of the life of Frederick Turner from a distance as a voice only, which I think he would appreciate. I first met Fred by way of books, and we were pen pals and readers of each other's work for the most part. This was back in the early 90s when I was writing my Mars trilogy, and I became aware of a book called Genesis, which turned out to be an epic poem or a novel in verse that was concerned with the terraforming of Mars, just like the novels I was working on at the time. So I read it with intense interest and increasing delight, because it struck me that Fred had looked at the same data I had from the Mariner and Viking landers and orbiters and come to a similar realization that this new planet that had been given to us was a remarkable and beautiful place and worthy of, in his case, an epic poem, in my case, a long novel about the terraforming of the place, the humanization of it. And of course, it struck me immediately that a phenomenon that would sometimes take me many pages to describe, Fred was very good at describing in a few lines of rather beautiful poetry. He had a gift and he used it well. I want to read one example for you from Genesis to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. And this is from Act 4, Scene 5. Time here is cheap. 1 billion years can pass almost without a marker. If you bought a century of Mars time in the script and currency of Earth, you'd pay an hour or half an hour of cashable event. It's really a young planet then, a poor old Cretan worth but a handful of Earth's golden summers. But it was beautiful. Those who first walked there said it was fresh as Kyoto earthen teaware, as the outback, as clean as is geometry, as bones. To spoil this archetype, this innocence, was to incur a guilt whose only ease was beauty overwhelming to the loss, was a millennial drunkenness of life that might forget its crime in ecstasy. There must be new assumptions in the matrix, new ratios, dimensions, and arrays, the crazy lightness of all things here, set in a poetry that brewed delight against the literal dimness of the light. Well, that was the project that we shared in our different ways. And there was also a utopian edge to Fred's story of Mars. The opportunity to build a new society from scratch obviously was an opportunity to make a better society. And he put it very well. This is in Act 5, Scene 2. No property on Mars can be fenced off, and no one be fenced out. So what is mine must be so by consent, not penning in. Thus property, possession, change their meaning. They are the sign of neighborhood and trust, the gratitude of the community, and money is the counter of that bond. Consider then a new economy of spirit and the making of the spirit. It is a floating world where wealth is what accrues about the things we give away. So in that sense, Fred was a very wealthy man. And when we got in touch with each other, we had a lively correspondence about many things. I read his books of criticism with enormous pleasure. I don't even know if that's the right word for them. They were history, they were philosophy. I think of Temple, Flute, and Oz in particular, but they were all good. And of course, his late book on the epic was a meditation on his own practice as well as on the long, indeed Paleolithic history of the epic as it came from orality around the fire into written form. He was possibly the world's expert on that particular genre. And then later on, it happened again. I was working on climate change and how we could cope with it and make it better, our relationship with our biosphere on Earth. And damned if Fred wasn't writing Apocalypse, an epic poem which is in many ways my favorite. And I have to say, The New World is a very good epic poem as well, his first one. And I hear now that there's a fourth one, which I look very much forward to reading. But Apocalypse is possibly, because of the congruences again in our thinking, and also his own fecundity of plot, incident, and the beauty of his language, it makes for a special thing. And it occurred to me also, back when I first ran into Genesis, that I had a vague memory of this name, this writer, this mind. And I want to remind all of you, maybe it isn't necessary, but his one science fiction novel, A Double Shadow, from the late 70s and published by a friend of mine, David Hartwell, which a beautiful editor, and I'm proud of him and of our community for taking in A Double Shadow and celebrating it. That's really a good novel. So although obviously his genre was not the novel per se, he put a good entry in there, as he did in so many other ways. And I also love More Light, his book of selected poems, and 2 ghost poems of moderate length. So what he did fits into a tradition that I think will keep him read, because people will be always reading this genre of the epic poem in modern times, the written down modern epic, which of course has Dante, Milton as precursors, but I'm thinking also of Clairol by Melville, and the 20th century attempts by American poets to do something book length and epic, even in their modernist aesthetic, like Patterson by William Carlos Williams, or the cantos of Ezra Pound. Then in recently and contemporaneous to Fred's own efforts, we have Omeros by Derek Walcott, The Folding Cliffs by W.S. Merwin, The Golden Gate by Vikram Seth, and the long poems of Dana Gioia. So it's a living genre, small but mighty, with a very deep history, obviously, and people will read them for the joy of it, and so Fred will be read. I only got to meet him twice. This was courtesy of Matt Brown at University of Texas, Dallas, who invited me to visit, and I had a wonderful time chatting with Fred finally in person. And the same happened a year or so later at the WorldCon, the World Science Fiction Convention. I think it was 2013 in San Antonio, Texas, and Fred came down to it, and I made sure that the science fiction world became more aware, and there were people there ready to celebrate his work and listen to him talk. That also was a delight. But that was it for me in person. I know that many of you there will have known him much better as a person and will have been the beneficiaries of his vivid, remarkable personality and the pleasure of his company. Well, books cannot replace that, but the sentences convey a certain memory of the mind that made them. And when that's what you've got, that's what you have to treasure. So, I wish you all well, and I wish I could be there, and I'll be reading Fred's work for the rest of my life. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you will also be. And for those of you who got to have him as a person, you were lucky. Thank you.
There are a few reasons for singing the Bach Gounod Ave Maria for Fred today. The main reason for choosing this piece of music is that in May 2011, our beloved Fred intensely enjoyed a Bach concert that was held in the St. Thomas Church, Bach's home, in Leipzig, Germany. Fred and I visited this concert together with his brother Bob and our mutual friend Amanda Ballard. We all agreed about the beauty of Johann Sebastian Bach's music. In our discussions afterwards, it became clear that an impressive number of neurocharms is at work in Bach's music at the same time. Even more so, a few very strong biological cultural associations are deeply engraved within the Mother Mary myth and figure. We associate safety, warmth, attention, caring, and food with her. In a way, this song therefore also invokes the spirit of Fred's mother, Edie. Last but not least, this small piece has had a ritual function in our funeral rites for 166 years now.
Hello. Here's a valediction by Fred's brothers and sister. I, Bob, will speak first, followed by my sister Renee and brothers Alex and Rory. This is a sonnet I wrote for Fred's 75th birthday. I sing the praises of my elder brother, born in East Haddon in Northamptonshire, born to be bearer of Promethean fire, a self-forged weapon unlike any other. Always exploring, my childhood's close companion, African memories which are indistinguishable. Our present selves, now built from the same tough rubble, our crests alike, our vales the same sad canyon. The Guy Fawkes timber that we singly found, we piled together on the great bonfire. So with our ideas, higher and higher, testing together whether they be sound. Together we built planes that really flew. I dedicate this sonnet, Fred, to you. For me, losing Fred felt like Sam losing Frodo in the last chapter of The Lord of the Rings. But to Sam the evening deepened to darkness as he stood at the haven, and as he looked at the grey sea, he saw only a shadow on the waters that was soon lost in the west. There still he stood, far into the night, hearing only the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shores of Middle Earth, and the sound of them sank deep into his heart. Good night, sweet prince, mon semblable, mon frère, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Thank you. We move on to my sister Rini.
Hello, I'm Irene Wellman, Fred's sister. It's hard to put into words my sense of loss of this dear, brilliant man. But here's a poem I wrote a week or so before he died. Fred. On the phone, my brother sounds tired, cancer riddling his body, though the chemo keeps it at bay for now. He faces it as he's always done, with bravado, as if he's a hero in his own story, battling the evil forces, unable to win, but going down with his bloodied sword into the murky depths. How our parents loved his defiance and nurtured his love of dragons and gods. We all smiled at his mouth noises, his jiggling feet, how he pulled on his front reddish hair until it came out, his freckles fickle as they were. Now his face too pale, his world reduced to four walls, Malin on hand to help him, the clock ticking, not much left but his thoughts, his pen and laptop, sun making shadows on the wall of the window plants, death peering in, yet still open to dreams, the power of words, still fighting, going down. This poem expresses my fears that he wouldn't make it, but I knew his spirit would carry on, lighting up so many lives. He and I always got along, laughing together at the whimsy and irony of the world. He never spoke an unkind word to me, my ally and friend, which said many wonderful times, including our childhood in Africa as a family. He'd had a rich, fulfilling life, he told me towards the end. I miss him very much, and so do all who loved him.
When I was a child, I was given an assignment to draw a picture of my family. I drew them all as stick figures walking in profile in the same direction, with me way up on Fred's shoulders. Offering Buddhist prayers on his behalf these last weeks, I remembered this, how much in those 1960s he had been a John Lennon in Pepperland figure for me with his Oxford accent, his round glasses, and his wild red beard. He was 17 years older than me and almost out of the house when I arrived, but he played such a role in the family nevertheless. Even in later years, he was there for me, for instance, being the only person at my wedding to think to record the Robbie Burns-style doggerel poem I'd composed and recited for my vows, and then to send it to us. We were distraught no one had caught it, but Fred came through. A couple of years ago, I attended a poetry festival soiree in a winery in Nevada City, California, where my wife works part-time. I was introduced to Dana Gloria, former poet laureate of California. As I approached, the musicality of his voice, even before I could make out his words, delighted me. Upon learning who my parents were, he launched into paeans of praise and defense for Fred's work. It turned out he was one of Fred's oldest and closest friends. Years earlier, I'd attended a restoration ecology conference organized by Bill Jordan, editor of Restoration and Management Notes, who had invited me. He also invited Fred, as our father's work on ritual had fascinated him regarding community environmental restoration events, the act of collectively burning the prairie to bring it back to life, which meant he was also amazed by Fred's theories on shame and beauty. Chatting over lunch at the conference, it came out Fred was either coming or going to another conference on Carl Jung. I can't remember his exact words, but he said to his astonished restorationist interlocutors something like, "I make a point of knowing things that apply to many different topics." That was Fred, polymath, in the sense of the word, perhaps.
Hi, I'm Rory Turner. I'm the youngest brother of Fred, and I just wanted to say a couple words about him for this occasion. Probably many sweet and truthful and beautiful things have been said about Fred today. I know that he was in the hearts of so many of us. For me, I saw him both as a brother and almost as an uncle. Our age difference was so large. I always looked up to Fred. I looked up to the way that he was shameless in his curiosity and so generous in his thinking. He left for all of us a legacy of writing and thought that will reverberate, I think, for some time. But what I miss most is the intimacy that his awareness of the little beauties, the little funny things gave us. We will miss him. I will miss him. May you rest in peace. May your unique register of being not be forgotten.